Hi, I'm Fontaine.
I'm Renee Stimpert.
I'm Tori.
And I'm Macie.
I'm Jessica Kauffman.
I'm Kelsey Toole.
And my name is Manigault, and today we will be presenting our research on correlates of loneliness in 3 different college samples. So the purpose of the present study was to evaluate how demographic information, social media use, alcohol consumption, and mental health outcomes interact with different types of loneliness. Previous research has indicated that both anxious and depressive symptomatology are predictors of loneliness, but not vice versa. In addition to this, social media use as well as alcohol drinking has been found to be positively correlated with depressive symptomatology, and resilience and self-esteem have been found to be negatively correlated with social media use. On top of this, a particular study by Chavez and colleagues indicated that the more marginalized a person identified as, especially women of color, the more likely they were to report the feeling of loneliness as well as increased alcohol consumption when compared to white males. Therefore, the facets of each of these symptoms led us to predict several significant interactions within our study.
Based on the previous research, our study consisted of 5 different hypotheses. Our first hypothesis was that previous research shows that bigger schools such as the University of South Carolina Upstate would report significantly higher levels of social and familial loneliness when compared to smaller schools such as Wofford College and Converse University. Our second hypothesis was that students who reported living further from home would then report significantly higher levels of familial loneliness. Our third hypothesis was that first-year students would report significantly higher levels of general loneliness when compared to all other class years. Our fifth hypothesis was that anxious symptomatology, depressive symptomatology, social media use, and drinking motivations for both coping and for increased social activity would serve as predictors for general loneliness. And our other hypothesis was that students who reported significantly higher levels of self-esteem and resilience would then report significantly lower levels of loneliness. And in our investigative research with previous literature, we also decided to look at a possible interaction of gender and race.
So to collect our data, we used a qualtrics survey, which was comprised of demographics and 7 questionnaires. As you can see, our demographics included race, age, gender, class year, school, distance from home, and residential status. Our 7 questionnaires on our qualtrics were the Social and Emotional Loneliness Scale, which measured loneliness, the Center for Epidemiologic Studies Depression Scale, which measured depressive symptomatology, the Hospital Anxiety and Depression Scale, but only the anxiety portion to measure anxious symptomatology, the Drinking Motives Questionnaire, which measured social and coping drinking motives, the Bergen Social Media Addiction Scale, which measured social media usage, the Resilience Evaluation Scale, which measures resilience, and the Rosenberg Self-Esteem Scale, which measures self-esteem. So the participants were sent the qualtrics link to Wofford students, USC Upstate students, and Converse students. Once completed, they were either entered into a drawing with 3 chances of winning a $50 Amazon gift card, or they were given course credit. So our participants included 126 Wofford students, which represents a co-educational residential small liberal arts campus, 131 USC Upstate students, which represents a medium-sized, primarily commuter campus, and 51 Converse students, which represents a predominantly single-sex school.
To assess the hypothesis stating that students at USC Upstate would experience higher levels of loneliness compared to students at Wofford and Converse, we conducted a one-way ANOVA, and we found there were no significant differences between all 3 types of loneliness across the college campuses, which did not support our hypothesis. For our next hypothesis, we conducted another one-way ANOVA to examine distance from home and levels of familial loneliness. We found that distance from home significantly impacted levels of familial loneliness, showing that students living farther from home reported higher levels of familial loneliness than students living closer to home. And for the final hypothesis, we conducted another one-way ANOVA, and we found that freshmen did not show significant differences in all 3 types of loneliness compared to upperclassmen. So in regards to the proposed hypothesis that loneliness would serve as a predictor for depressive and anxious symptomatology, drinking as a social and coping mechanism, and social media use, we conducted a linear regression, and the results were varied. For depressive symptomatology, we found that romantic and general loneliness served as predictors for this trait, and we also found that there were no significant results for anxious symptomatology in the 3 types of loneliness. For using drinking as a coping mechanism, we found that social loneliness and general loneliness served as predictors for this type of behavior, but we didn't find any significant results for using drinking as a social mechanism, and we did not find any significant results for loneliness in social media. For our next hypothesis, that loneliness would serve as a negative predictor for resilience and self-esteem, we also found varied results after conducting a linear regression, and we found that for self-esteem, social and familial loneliness significantly predicted self-esteem. So as a person became more socially and familial lonely, their self-esteem actually went up. But we did not find any significant results for resilience. And then finally, for gender and race, as you can see on this graph, with the y-axis representing romantic loneliness scores and the x-axis representing males and females, non-white females actually scored the highest for romantic loneliness, and non-white males showed the least amount of romantic loneliness in all of our population.
We found no significant differences in loneliness across the 3 campuses. Prior research led us to believe USC Upstate would be the most lonely. However, our results do not show. We see with increased distance from home comes increased familial loneliness, and studies in college students show students who live further from home view their home as less accessible, and this can cause some unwanted disconnect between that student and their family member. More depressive symptomatology means more loneliness, especially romantic loneliness. Studies in college students show students who desire romantic connection but have no real romantic prospects feel a little bit bad about themselves, contributing to some depression. The more one copes with alcohol, the more socially lonely they are. As we know, alcohol is great for short-term satisfaction. However, when sober, we're seeing students are not happy with their real social situation. And increased self-esteem came with increased loneliness, and prior studies point out some traits associated with high self-esteem, such as poor self-awareness and quickness to criticize others, can be off-putting, and that can cause some social disconnect in that person. Our interaction found non-white females in our sample were the most romantically lonely, while non-white males were the least romantically lonely. And studies have shown non-white females receive the least amount of matches on online dating apps, and non-white men are the most likely to date outside of their race, so this gives them some more romantic prospects.
Okay, so the limitations to our study includes a small sample size, which limited the number of male participants with only 71 male participants to 273 female participants. Our racial diversity was also limited due to a small sample size. A small effect size was found due to the small sample size, which decreased the power of our analysis. This was found in our first hypothesis looking at schools where Wofford College and USC Upstate had double the participants of Converse. A second limitation we found was in our self-report survey, where participants were confused due to our Likert-type scales varying scoring values per measurement. For example, one scale might have 9 valued as strongly disagree, and then the next scale would have 9 valued as strongly agree. Therefore, the future directions for our study include a workshop intervention held on campus and virtually to help spread awareness and prevention for general loneliness among students. Additionally, to focus on socioeconomic status to determine if schools providing transportation to local airports and Greyhound bus stations could alleviate familial loneliness by making home more accessible. And then lastly, to combat non-white female loneliness on campus, schools can become more involved with NPHC charters to allow more social activity and social support systems for these women. Thank you. And questions?
study where I looked at Wofford students compared to students at UNC Chapel Hill with the same hypotheses that you'd have, and I found significantly higher ratings of social connection at Wofford compared to UNC Chapel Hill. So I'm curious how you think that meshes with the results that you found. Do you think like social connection is the opposite of loneliness, and could that maybe explain it, or do you think there's a difference between the schools that you were comparing?
I would say that UNC Chapel Hill has a lot more organizations in their social activities. 52% of students at Wofford participate in Greek life, which we found that even less students within that Greek life are minority students. So with Greek life being that big pull for Wofford and not having a lot of other like facets of social interaction on campus, I think that probably eliminates Wofford students, or alludes to Wofford students' loneliness compared to larger universities.
So why did you guys combine race and gender? Like, why were they not separate groups?
So one of the biggest things that we found when we first started, even our first week of research, was that when it comes to analyzing sex alone, all of the results from other prior research was incredibly mixed. And one of the biggest indicators in our own research was that there was such a large variation between sex for non-white people, but such very minimal variation between white participants that we had to analyze them within each other.
Why did you look at these specific factors in loneliness?
So a lot of our previous literature has looked at depressive symptomatology and anxious symptomatology, as those are the biggest facets that college students experience. We also looked at social media usage, because a study that I looked at this summer with OMC showed that a majority of people who use social media, specifically for Wofford's social media sites, are ages between 18 and 22, which are the prior ages of college students. And we also looked at resilience and self-esteem, because a lot of previous literature have shown that the more self-esteem and the more resilience you have, the less lonely you are.
As the class of COVID, the freshman class of COVID, was there any consideration of what y'all went through, and would it have changed the outcome?
From my own experience at Wofford, not only was I a freshman during COVID, but I also didn't have a roommate. And a lot of the organizations that I'm active in right now were not active my freshman year, so that definitely influenced my participation in the study.
One reason we looked at loneliness was because of a very recent Surgeon General report on loneliness since COVID, and how it is just skyrocketing with depression and anxiety in college students. So that very much drove what we did.